They said miracles don't happen anymore. But that night, in the middle of a raging storm, a broken man holding his starving baby knocked on a stranger's door. No one could have known what God had planned behind those walls, how grief, loss, and faith would collide into something divine. A widow with milk meant for a child she'd lost, a soldier begging heaven for one last chance. And when their worlds met, a miracle was born. If you still believe love can heal, if you still believe God works in mysterious ways, this story will touch your soul. Don't forget to subscribe, leave a comment, and share this video, because someone out there might need this reminder today. The wind rolled off the mountains like a beast that refused to rest. It tore through the pines, screamed across the white fields, and slammed against the crooked wooden fence of a forgotten ranch outside the town of Bridger, Montana. Snow drifted in slow, heavy spirals, covering everything in a quiet, merciless white. It was early February, the kind of cold that bit through denim and settled deep into bone. The sky hung low and gray, and the air tasted of iron and wood smoke. Inside the small ranch house, the single window glowed dimly against the storm. The light came from a fireplace that fought for life, its flames thin and uncertain. David Miller sat near it, his back hunched, his broad shoulders wrapped in an old military jacket that had long lost its shape. He was 36, tall and built like a man who had known both labor and war. Thick arms, a square jaw shadowed by 3 days' stubble, and eyes the color of storm water. There was a hardness to him, not from cruelty, but from endurance, the kind of stillness born from too many nights awake and too many things left unsaid. David had been a Marine once. He'd served 2 tours overseas and returned home with a limp no one could fix, and a silence that no one could break. His wife, Emily, used to call that silence the desert that never left him. Now she was gone, buried under a small wooden cross just behind the barn. The snow piled so high, it nearly erased her name. She died only weeks after giving birth to their daughter, Lily, a soft, fragile baby with her mother's auburn hair and her father's serious gray eyes. Now, in the thin warmth of the cabin, Lily screamed. The sound pierced through the air, high and desperate, echoing off the wooden walls. David tried to cradle her, his rough hands trembling as he held the bottle near her tiny mouth. "Come on, sweetheart," he whispered, voice hoarse, almost pleading. "Just a little, please." Lily turned her head away. Her cheeks flushed crimson against her white blanket. She wailed louder, kicking with the frustrated strength of an infant too young to understand hunger, but old enough to feel pain. The bottle slipped from David's fingers, rolled across the uneven floor, and came to rest under the chair. He cursed softly, rubbing his eyes with the back of his hand. His whole body ached, from sleepless nights, from bending over the crib, from carrying grief that never eased. He walked to the small kitchen, poured the milk again, warmed it on the stove, and tested it against his wrist. The clock on the wall read 3:07 a.m. The wind screamed outside, shaking the window panes like a warning. When he turned back, Lily was still crying, her little arms reaching into the empty air. David took her into his arms, pacing the narrow floorboards. His boots thudded softly. "It's just you and me now, kiddo," he said under his breath, his voice breaking. "Just us." He thought of Emily's last night, the fever, the panic, the way she had squeezed his hand and said, "Promise me she won't grow up alone." He had promised, but at that moment, he wasn't sure he could keep it. The room smelled faintly of ash, milk, and damp wool, On the table lay half-finished letters he had written to no one. Maybe to his wife, maybe to God. He didn't even know anymore. The last one ended halfway through a sentence. I don't know how to feed her. The heater clicked off again, and the silence between Lily's sobs grew heavy. David knelt by the crib, running a hand through his messy brown hair. He hadn't shaved in days. His eyes were rimmed red, and his lips were cracked from the cold. You've got to take something, he whispered. Please. She didn't. She only cried harder. He sank into the old rocking chair by the fire, clutching her close to his chest. The chair creaked with each slow motion, the firelight throwing his shadow long across the wall. The shape of a man who had fought too many battles and was losing the one that mattered most. He could feel the heat of her tiny body against his heart, could feel her shaking breaths. Tears welled in his eyes, but didn't fall. An hour passed, then another. The storm outside worsened, the sound of wind becoming a constant roar. The house groaned as if it might give way. David stood finally, swaying with exhaustion, and stared out the frost-coated window. Beyond the blur of white, the world looked endless, a cold expanse with no promise of help. He thought about calling someone, but who? The nearest neighbor was 5 miles away, and most of them were retirees who barely knew his name. He had already been into town last week, asking at the small clinic if anyone could help him find breast milk. The nurse, a young woman with kind eyes, had shaken her head with quiet pity. No new mothers here right now, Mr. Miller, she'd said. You might try Billings. Billings was 80 miles away. He'd come home that night with nothing but a few cans of formula that Lily refused. He had prayed once, long ago. He didn't anymore. The wind slammed against the window again, and Lily's cries rose with it, wild and raw. Something broke in him then. Not anger, not panic, just a deep, weary surrender. He kissed her forehead, murmured, "Hang on, baby," and laid her back in the cradle. Then he went to the corner of the room, pulled an old cardboard sign from behind a box, and began to write. His handwriting was rough, the letters uneven and smudged with fatigue. Need help. Infant hungry. Breast milk needed. He stared at the words for a long time, then exhaled and nodded once. It was the first plan he'd had in days. He bundled Lily into a small blanket printed with faded sunflowers, zipped her into a baby carrier, and grabbed his coat. The cold hit him the second he stepped outside, sharp, unrelenting, cutting through every layer of fabric. The night was black except for the glow of his truck's headlights. The vehicle was old, a '98 Ford F-150 with more rust than paint. But it started on the third try. He strapped the baby seat beside him, double-checked the blankets, and turned onto the long gravel road that led toward the highway. As he drove, the snowflakes swirled through the beams of light like falling ashes. The sign sat on the passenger seat beside the bottle and a thermos of coffee gone cold. His eyes stayed fixed ahead, jaw tight. The storm howled around him, and the wipers squeaked against the glass. At one point, he slowed near a turn, the headlights catching the outline of a small white cross buried half in snow. Someone else's loss frozen into the landscape. He looked away quickly. "Hold on, Lily," he said again, softer this time. "We'll find someone. I promise." Her cries had weakened to soft hiccups now, small and fragile, like the last tremors of hope. David reached over, brushing a hand against the edge of the blanket. The gesture steadied him somehow. He pressed his foot to the gas. Montana stretched out before him, miles of cold, empty road winding through the storm. Behind him, The faint orange glow of the ranch disappeared completely, swallowed by the snow. Ahead, only darkness and the faint light of a town he prayed was still awake. He didn't know that before the sun rose, someone would open a door to him, and that beyond that door waited a woman who had lost her own child, and a dog whose instincts would change everything. The road to Bridger wound through the foothills like a narrow ribbon swallowed by white. Snow blurred the world into shifting shades of gray, erasing the line between earth and sky. David gripped the steering wheel, jaw clenched, every muscle tight with exhaustion. The wipers beat a frantic rhythm, fighting a storm that only grew heavier. Beside him, Lily whimpered weakly, her small cries muffled beneath layers of blankets. The heater sputtered, but barely warmed the cab. His headlights cut through the storm just far enough to see the endless snow ahead. No shapes, no houses, only a dark line of trees and the ghostly flash of fence posts buried in drifts. Then the truck fishtailed. The tires slid on black ice, spinning the rear out toward the edge of a ditch. David cursed under his breath, twisting the wheel hard, his pulse spiking. The headlights swung wildly and caught something ahead. The faint outline of a small wooden cabin half hidden behind a rise. A single porch light flickering through the storm. He eased the truck to a stop, heart pounding. The wind screamed when he opened the door. It punched through his coat, bit into his face. He tucked Lily close to his chest, shielding her from the snow as he trudged toward the faint light. His boots sank deep, the cold cutting through his jeans until his legs went numb. The cabin looked weathered but solid, built from thick timber, smoke curling faintly from its chimney. Someone was awake. David climbed the steps and knocked hard, his knuckles raw against the wood. At first, nothing. Then, after a long moment, he heard movement, a shuffle, then a low, sharp bark from inside. A dog. The door cracked open. A woman stood there, holding a lantern that cast a pale glow across the porch. She looked to be in her early 30s, her dark hair pulled into a loose braid that had come undone near the ends. Strands clung to her damp cheeks. Her face was pale but strong, the kind of face that once smiled easily but hadn't in a long time. Her eyes were green-gray, tired yet alert. "Please," David said, voice rough from the cold. "My truck slid off the road. My baby, she hasn't eaten in hours." The woman hesitated, tightening her grip on the lantern. Behind her came a deep, resonant growl. The dog emerged from the shadows. A large German shepherd, thick-coated and powerful, his fur black and tan, his amber eyes locked on David. His ears were erect, his tail stiff, his body poised between protectiveness and restraint. The dog's presence filled the doorway like a living wall. "It's okay, Max," the woman murmured, though her own tone wavered. "Stay." David's breath steamed in the air. "I don't mean any harm," he said quickly. "She's just hungry." He shifted Lily slightly, letting the woman see the baby's face. The child's tiny mouth quivered, her cry breaking weakly through the wind. Something changed in the woman's expression. A flicker of pain, recognition. She stepped closer, holding the lantern higher. The light fell across David's face, revealing the exhaustion carved deep into it. The bloodshot eyes, the cracked lips, the stubble on his jaw. Then her gaze moved to Lily, whose small fists trembled against the blanket. "Come in," she said softly, almost to herself. "You'll freeze out there." David exhaled in relief, following her inside. The warmth of the cabin hit him like a wave, carrying the scent of wood smoke and something faintly sweet, maybe tea or herbs drying near the stove. He shut the door behind him, snow scattering onto the wooden floor. "Set her near the fire," the woman said quietly, pointing to a rocking chair draped with a wool blanket. "You can warm up." He obeyed, lowering himself into the chair. Lily's cries rose again, thin and strained. The woman crouched by the stove, adding a log. The flames grew brighter, chasing the cold from the corners. The German shepherd stayed near the doorway, watching silently, his tail twitching once before settling. His breath came in soft huffs, ears rotating toward every sound. "Thank you," David said after a moment. "I'm sorry to bother you. I didn't know where else to go." She looked over her shoulder. "No one should be out in this storm." Then quieter. "Not with a baby." He nodded. "I'm David Miller," he said, his voice almost swallowed by the crackle of the fire. She hesitated before answering. "Clara Evans." Clara turned fully now, stepping closer to look at Lily. The baby's face was red from crying, her lips dry. Clara's eyes softened, and then something inside her broke. Her hand went to her chest, pressing against her blouse. A faint, dark stain began to spread there, and she froze. Her breath hitched audibly. David frowned. "Are you all right?" She nodded quickly but didn't speak. Her eyes glistened with sudden tears. "She's so small," Clara whispered. "How old is she?" "Almost 3 months." Clara swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "My son would have been the same age." David's stomach twisted. "I'm sorry." Her voice cracked. "He died in October. Of fever. The doctors said there was nothing to be done." She looked away, blinking fast. "My body, it didn't stop. It doesn't understand he's gone." Her hand trembled at her side. "Every day the milk still comes. I throw it away. I thought I could live with that." The cabin fell silent except for the wind pressing against the windows. Lily whimpered again, weaker this time. Clara stepped closer, kneeling beside the chair. "She's hungry, isn't she?" David nodded helplessly. "I've tried everything. Formula, goat's milk, but she won't take it." Clara reached out slowly, her fingers shaking as she brushed Lily's cheek. The baby turned instinctively toward the touch. A small sob escaped Clara's throat. "She knows," she whispered. David's voice came out as a whisper. "What?" "She knows what she needs." Clara drew a shuddering breath. "Please, let me help her." For a heartbeat, David didn't move. The offer, the rawness of it, stunned him. But then Lily cried again, the sound breaking any hesitation he had left. He nodded. Clara unbuttoned her blouse with careful, practiced motions, her eyes wet. She gathered Lily in her arms, the baby so light she barely seemed real. When the infant latched, the sound of her swallowing filled the room. Small, rhythmic, alive. Tears streamed down Clara's face. "It's okay, little one," she whispered. "Eat. You're safe." David watched in silence, his throat thick. The fire flickered, throwing soft gold across the scene. A soldier broken by loss, a mother haunted by grief, and a child caught between both, finding life again. The German shepherd, Max, rose from his post and padded closer, his large head tilting slightly. He sniffed the air, then the baby, and with a quiet whine, lay down at Clara's feet. His eyes softened, tail thumping once against the floor. It was as if he, too, understood what was happening. The healing that neither human could name. Minutes passed. Lily's cries faded into soft, sleepy sighs. Clara's breathing slowed, steadying with the rhythm of the child in her arms. David finally whispered, "Thank you." Clara shook her head gently, brushing the baby's fine hair. "Don't thank me. Just let her rest." Outside, the storm howled, but inside, the cabin held a fragile peace. Max lifted his head, watching the firelight flicker against the walls, then rested it back on his paws. For the first time in weeks, Lily slept. And for the first time since October, Clara smiled, a small, broken smile that trembled like the flame itself. Morning arrived slowly in the Montana hills, pale and silent. The storm had passed, leaving a world remade in white. Snow covered the pines like frozen lace, and the air was so still that even the smoke rising from Clara's chimney looked hesitant to move. Inside the cabin, a fragile peace held the air together. The crackle of the fire, the soft rhythm of a child's breath, and the faint smell of coffee and pine sap. David stirred first, blinking against the thin sunlight that seeped through the frost-covered window. He was sleeping on the couch, still wearing yesterday's flannel shirt and jeans, the heavy fatigue of the night clinging to him. The blanket that had been tucked around his shoulders had the faint scent of lavender and wood smoke. Clara's doing, he realized. For a long moment, he simply sat there, listening. The crying had stopped. Lily was sleeping, her breaths soft and even. The quiet was so new it almost frightened him. Clara was already awake. She stood by the stove, hair still in that loose braid, but now with stray curls escaping around her face. The warmth of the fire painted her skin in soft gold. She moved quietly, with a grace that came from habit, the kind of movements learned from solitude. She glanced at David once but didn't speak, her expression unreadable. Max, the German shepherd, lay near the door, his head resting on his paws. His ears twitched with every shift in the wind outside, but his body stayed relaxed. Every now and then, he lifted his gaze toward the baby in the cradle, then back to Clara, as though guarding both without needing to move. "Morning," David said finally, voice low. Clara looked up, a faint, polite smile flickering across her lips. "You should rest a little longer," she said. "You barely slept." "I've been worse," he replied, rubbing his neck. "Marine habit. Don't stay down too long or the world starts to tilt." Her smile softened. "I wouldn't know. The world's been tilting for me for months." The silence that followed wasn't heavy. It was the kind that two tired people could share without awkwardness. Clara poured coffee into 2 chipped mugs and set one near him. "No milk, sorry," she said. David chuckled quietly. "I've had worse, Black." She sat across from him, cupping her mug in both hands. The steam curled between them like a thin veil. Through the window, the morning light revealed the landscape. White drifts, broken fences, and the line of David's half-buried truck near the road. "Looks like you'll be here a while," Clara said softly. "Yeah," he admitted. "The road's still buried. I'll dig out once it clears a little." Clara nodded, but her gaze drifted toward the cradle where Lily slept, wrapped in a soft, knitted blanket. "She's beautiful," she murmured. "You can see her mother in her." David followed her gaze, a flicker of grief crossing his face. "Yeah, Emily was brighter than me. She could walk into a room and make people feel they mattered. I don't know how she did it." Clara smiled faintly. "Maybe that's what love looks like." He looked at her then, really looked. The tired eyes, the faint shadows beneath them, the way her shoulders carried both strength and weariness. "You talk like someone who's known it," he said. "I did." She took a slow sip of her coffee. "His name was Aaron. We met in college. He wanted to be a park ranger, always said he felt more at home in the mountains than anywhere else. He died 2 years ago. Car accident on the interstate." She said it plainly, but her fingers tightened around the mug. After that, I moved here. Thought maybe if I was surrounded by quiet, the noise in my head would stop. David nodded, his jaw working as if he wanted to say something but couldn't find the words. The baby stirred then, breaking the silence. Clara set down her mug and went to her. Max rose too, tail wagging once quietly. Clara lifted Lily into her arms, humming under her breath, a low, familiar tune that wrapped around the room like a memory. "What song is that?" David asked. She smiled without turning. "Something I used to sing for my son, Thomas." The name hung in the air. David lowered his gaze. "He'd be about her age, right?" Clara nodded. 3 months. For a long moment, only the fire spoke. David rose from the couch, crossing the room to the window. The glass was cracked, a thin line of frost creeping inward. "You should let me fix that," he said. "Cold like this will get into your bones." "I've been meaning to, but—" She trailed off with a shrug. He found a hammer and a few nails near the tool bench by the door. "Then I'll do it now." He began patching the frame, movements steady and methodical. Clara watched him from the rocking chair, the baby asleep again in her arms. "Do you always have to be doing something?" she asked softly. He smiled a little without looking up. "If I stop, I start thinking too much." "About her?" "About everything." By noon, the sun had turned the snow outside into a sheet of blinding light. David stepped out briefly to shovel the porch steps, his breath visible in the cold air. Max followed him, padding through the snow with practiced ease, occasionally stopping to sniff the wind. The dog barked once, not a warning, just acknowledgement, before settling near the door again, his fur dusted with frost. When David returned, Clara was cooking. The smell of frying eggs and toast filled the cabin. She handed him a plate without ceremony. "You look like someone who hasn't eaten in days," she said. He grinned faintly. "That obvious?" She arched a brow. "You've got the eyes of a man who's been running on coffee and guilt." He laughed, startled by the accuracy. "You're not wrong." As the day wore on, they found themselves talking more, not about plans or weather, but about the small things that made life feel alive again. Clara told him about the way Thomas had loved the sound of rain on the roof, how he'd fall asleep to it. David shared how Emily used to hum while kneading bread, something that used to annoy him but now haunted him like a song he couldn't forget. Each story carried a piece of loss, but also something gentler, the proof that they had loved deeply once, and that love, somehow, still lingered. That evening, the 3 of them, 4 if you counted Max, sat near the fire. Clara hummed that same lullaby, Lily asleep against her chest. David leaned back in the chair, eyes half closed, his rough hands resting still for once. Max stretched out between them, his head on his paws, one ear flicking toward every soft sound the baby made. The storm outside was gone, but in its place came another kind of quiet, the one that doesn't demand words, that lives between people who have nothing left to hide. By late February, the snow around Bridger had begun to soften into dirty slush. Meltwater trickled along the ditches beside the gravel road, carrying bits of straw and pine needles down toward the valley. The sky was still gray, but it no longer pressed so heavy on the earth. David loaded Lily into the truck early that morning, her car seat snug beside him, while Clara stood on the porch holding a thermos of coffee she'd made before dawn. She wore a wool sweater that hung loosely from her shoulders and jeans tucked into old leather boots. The faint color returning to her cheeks made her look younger, though her eyes still carried a certain guarded sadness. "Be careful on the bridge," she said quietly, one hand tightening around the railing. "It's still iced over near the bend." David nodded. "I'll be back by noon." He gave Max a quick pat on the head. The shepherd wagged his tail once, then returned to his spot beside Clara, watching the truck until it disappeared beyond the hill. The town of Bridger lay 15 miles south, a small sprawl of weathered buildings and crooked telephone poles. It had one diner, one gas station, and a grocery that doubled as a hardware store. David had driven there hundreds of times before, back when Emily was alive. But today, as he parked and stepped out carrying Lily's carrier, he felt the weight of curious eyes long before he saw them. Inside the store, the bell above the door jingled. Warm air smelling of coffee and sawdust drifted around him. Behind the counter stood Martha Lang, the store's owner, a heavy-set woman in her 50s with short silver hair and a sharp, assessing gaze, softened only by the lines of age around her mouth. Martha had run the store since her husband died a decade ago, and though she could gossip with the best of them, she had a quiet fondness for soldiers and single fathers alike. "Well, if it isn't David Miller," she said with a half-smile. "Haven't seen you in months, and this must be your little girl." She leaned closer, her tone softening. "Lord, she looks just like Emily." David managed a small smile. "Yeah, she does." As he paid for diapers and milk, two men near the back began to whisper. He didn't need to hear the words to know they were about him. He could feel it in the small pauses, the glances that cut sideways and didn't linger. Still, when one of them, Tom Grady, a ranch hand with a thick mustache and a temper for whiskey, spoke loud enough for everyone to hear, the words stung. "Heard he's shacked up with the Evans widow," Tom said. "Guess she's found a new way to keep her milk from going to waste." Laughter followed, rough and mean. David's hands froze mid-count. The room seemed to shrink. Martha's face hardened, and she shot the men a glare sharp enough to slice through the smoke-stained air. "You two ought to mind your tongues," she snapped. "Some of us still got decency left." The men muttered something and turned away, but the damage was done. David said nothing. He picked up his bag, nodded to Martha, and left. Outside, the wind bit colder. Lily began to fuss in her seat, and David whispered softly to calm her. But his mind burned. He knew gossip in a small town moved faster than snowmelt, and once it started, there was no stopping it. By the time he drove back, clouds had thickened again, threatening another storm. Clara was on the porch when he pulled in, her hair loose now, the wind catching the ends and whipping them across her face. Max barked once in greeting before trotting toward the truck, nose pressed against the door as if checking they were both unharmed. David climbed out, the anger still simmering low beneath his exhaustion. "What happened?" Clara asked immediately, reading it in his face. He hesitated. "Nothing that matters." Her brow furrowed. "You're a terrible liar." He exhaled, rubbed his hands over his face. "People talk, that's all." Clara's expression dimmed, the color draining from her cheeks. "About me?" He didn't answer. He didn't have to. That night, the wind returned, dragging the scent of wet earth through the cracks in the window frame. They'd eaten a quiet dinner, soup and cornbread, but neither said much. Lily slept between them in the cradle by the fire, her small breaths filling the silences they couldn't. Clara sat with her sewing, though her hands barely moved. David mended the handle of a shovel just to keep busy. Max lay near the hearth, occasionally lifting his head at the sound of distant thunder. When the first rock hit the window, the noise was sharp and sudden. Glass splintered, a small shower of shards scattering onto the floor. Max leapt up instantly, barking, hackles raised. The baby stirred and began to cry. David was already on his feet, moving fast toward the door. "Don't!" Clara cried, clutching Lily close. "It could be anyone." But he didn't listen. He threw the door open, the cold wind slamming against him. The yard lay in darkness except for the faint beam of his flashlight sweeping across the snow. Nothing but footprints leading toward the road. 2 sets, maybe 3. He shouted into the night, his voice carrying down the hill. "You think this is funny?" His words echoed, unanswered. Somewhere far off, an engine started, tires crunching over ice. Then silence. When he came back inside, Clara was sitting on the floor, Lily in her arms, Max pressed close beside her, growling low. Tears streaked her face, though she tried to hide them. David knelt beside her, checking the baby, the window, the shards on the floor. "It's just a few kids," he muttered, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed his calm tone. Clara shook her head. "No, it's not. It's everyone. The whispers, the looks, they've been building for days. They think her voice broke. They think I'm something shameful." David wanted to deny it, but he couldn't. "I'll take Lily and go," he said suddenly. "It's safer for you." Her eyes widened, fear flashing through them. "No." "Clara, don't," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. "Don't leave. She needs you. And—" She hesitated, words catching in her throat. "And I need to know I'm not crazy for feeling like this. Like maybe I can care again, even after everything." The silence that followed was heavier than any storm. Max lowered his head between his paws, watching them both, as if sensing the delicate balance that hung in the room. David looked at her then, truly looked. The fear, the strength, the rawness in her eyes. He reached out, brushing a tear from her cheek with a calloused thumb. "You're not crazy," he said softly. "You're human." For the first time in weeks, Clara didn't look away. Outside, thunder rolled across the hills, but inside, the firelight flickered over 2 faces that no longer seemed like strangers. Neither spoke again that night. But when the storm broke and the wind eased, David found himself sitting beside her, Lily asleep between them, Max at their feet. And though no promises were spoken, something had shifted, a quiet acknowledgement that they were no longer alone in their pain. Spring arrived in the Montana Valley like a shy guest, slow, hesitant, almost afraid to stay. The snow melted from the ridges in thin ribbons, revealing dark earth and the first blush of green grass. Streams gurgled where ice had once sealed silence, and the wind no longer carried bitterness, but the faint smell of thawed soil. In the backyard of the small cabin, the world looked reborn. The fields shimmered with dew under the morning sun, and the air was cool enough to see one's breath fade gently into the light. David knelt in the soft earth behind the cabin, his jeans streaked with mud and his sleeves rolled to the elbows. His once unruly beard was trimmed now, streaked with hints of early gray that caught the sunlight. The lines around his eyes were still there, etched by hardship and sleepless nights, but they'd softened. The soldier's tension that had once bound his shoulders had loosened, replaced by something quieter. Purpose. Beside him, Lily sat in the grass, now nearly 6 months old, chubby and bright-eyed, her giggles breaking through the sound of birds. Her tiny hands reached toward a sapling David held steady, a young white pine with roots wrapped in burlap, its needles a soft, silvery green. Clara stood a few steps away, holding a tin cup of coffee and watching them both. The morning light made her seem lighter, too. her long dark hair tied back with a red ribbon, her cheeks warmed by the sun. She wore an old flannel shirt of David's, sleeves rolled high, the fabric hanging loose on her slender frame. There was a calmness about her now, the kind that comes only after surviving too much and learning how to breathe again. She set the coffee down on the porch railing and walked closer, her boots pressing into the wet ground. "Did you pick the spot?" she asked, her voice soft, warm. "Yeah," David said, glancing up with a faint smile. "It'll get plenty of sun here, and the wind won't break it when winter comes again." Clara knelt beside him, brushing the soil from her hands. "You sound like you're talking about more than a tree." He grinned, that crooked half-smile she'd come to know. "Maybe I am." They worked in quiet harmony, digging the hole wider, setting the young tree carefully in place. Lily gurgled beside them, fascinated by the clump of earth between her tiny fingers. Max, now 6 years old and more regal than ever, lay nearby on the porch, his fur gleaming in the light. His once restless vigilance had softened into watchful calm. Every so often he would lift his head, ears twitching to the rhythm of his human family, the clang of the shovel, the murmur of voices, the baby's laughter. When the last of the soil was packed around the roots, David leaned back on his heels, wiping sweat from his brow. "There," he said, satisfied. "White pine, stubborn little thing. Grows slow but holds on through anything. Storms, frost, drought, you name it." Clara tilted her head. "Sounds like someone I know." He gave her a look that said more than words could. For a long moment, they both just stood there, watching the sapling sway gently in the breeze. It was small, fragile even, but it looked alive in a way that resonated deeply inside both of them. Later that morning, David climbed the ladder to the porch roof, a hammer tucked into his belt. The winter had taken its toll. Shingles were missing, nails rusted loose. Clara watched from below, hands on her hips. "You sure you're not stalling?" she asked. He looked down, feigning confusion. "Stalling." She folded her arms. "You've fixed that roof twice this month. It's not going anywhere." He laughed softly, the sound carrying down the slope. "Maybe I just like having something to fix." Clara shook her head but smiled. "You can't fix everything, David. Doesn't mean I won't try." Inside the cabin, Lily napped in her cradle, the sunlight spilling over her soft hair. Clara returned to the porch and brewed fresh coffee. When David finally climbed down, hands and face streaked with dust, she handed him a cup. Their fingers brushed briefly, and neither pulled away too quickly. "I have to head back next week," he said quietly after a moment. She looked up, her expression unreadable. "You mean—" "The reserve unit called," he said. "Just 2 weeks of training near Helena. Routine stuff. I can't say no." Clara nodded slowly. "You don't have to explain. I just—" He stopped, eyes on the pine tree. "When I get back, if you and Max are still here, I'll know I've got a place to come home to." The words hung there between them, carried softly by the wind. Clara looked down at the coffee, then at the baby sleeping through the open window. "I don't make promises I can't keep," she said after a long pause. Then quietly, "But Max and Lily, they'll miss you." David smiled. "What about you?" Her eyes met his. "Maybe me too." That evening, as the sun fell behind the mountains, they stood together near the young pine. Its needles caught the fading light, turning silver against the orange sky. David wrapped an arm lightly around her shoulders. "You think it'll survive?" he asked. Clara leaned her head against him, her gaze on the horizon. if it's planted deep enough. Yes. The next morning came cold and misty. The valley was wrapped in fog so thick it blurred the world into ghostly shapes. David loaded the truck before dawn, checking his duffel twice, though there wasn't much in it. Clara stood on the porch with Lily in her arms, the baby bundled tight in a wool blanket. Max sat beside them, tail brushing against the wood, eyes alert. "You sure you don't want me to drive you to the station?" Clara asked. He shook his head. "It's better this way. Goodbye's easier when it's quiet." She managed a small smile. "You really think this is goodbye?" He hesitated, then stepped forward. His rough hand brushed the side of her face, lingering there. "I hope not." Then he climbed into the truck, the engine rumbling to life. As he drove down the gravel road, the fog swallowed the headlights, and the world became nothing but gray and memory. Max ran a few yards after the truck, barking once, a low, aching sound, before stopping at the fence line. Clara stood still on the porch, Lily's head resting on her shoulder. The sapling swayed gently in the wind, its roots gripping the earth, and as the sound of the truck faded into the distance, Clara whispered softly into the mist, "We'll be here." Sometimes, miracles don't arrive with thunder or blinding light. Sometimes they come quietly, in the shape of a hungry baby who refuses to give up, a grieving woman who opens her door to a stranger, or a soldier who learns that strength isn't in fighting alone, but in choosing to stay. In the silence of that small cabin, beneath the whispering branches of the young white pine, something divine stirred. Not loud, not dramatic, but gentle. Like the breath of God moving through human hearts that dared to love again. Perhaps that's what miracles truly are. Not the parting of seas or the turning of water into wine, but the courage to keep loving after loss, to forgive after pain, to hope when the world tells you not to. Each day, somewhere out there, someone is living their own quiet miracle. A father rebuilding his faith, a mother rediscovering her purpose, a soul learning to trust again. And maybe if we look close enough, we'll see that God's hand has been there all along, in the tears we shed, the doors we open, the strangers who become family. If this story touched your heart, if you believe that love and grace can still find their way through the storms of life, leave a comment below. Share this story with someone who might need a little light today. Subscribe to our channel so together we can keep spreading faith, hope, and stories that remind us we are never truly alone. May God bless you. May He heal what hurts. And may He fill your home with the quiet kind of miracle that changes everything. The miracle of love.